The moment I walked into the room, I felt the tension in the air. It wasn't like the warm, excited atmosphere you see in movies. No, this was different. My baby shower was supposed to be a celebration of new life, of the little bundle of joy I was carrying, but instead, it felt like a trap waiting to spring. My husband, Mark, was beside me, his hand gently resting on my back, trying to reassure me with his presence. But I could already feel the cold stares of his family as they watched me. His mother, in particular, had made it clear from the start that she wasn't exactly thrilled about me being in their family. I guess it started when we got married, but that was nothing compared to today. The room was filled with Mark's relatives, all pretending to smile, but I could see the judgment in their eyes. They were polite, but the underlying animosity was impossible to ignore. I knew it would be hard fitting in with them, but I had hoped that, after almost 2 years of marriage, they'd come to accept me. I couldn't have been more wrong. We took our seats, and the gift opening ceremony began. At first, I thought it was just a simple tradition, but when I opened the first gift, I was stunned. It was a set of overly expensive baby clothes I knew I couldn't afford, and frankly I didn't want. The clothes weren't the issue. It was the smug look on my mother-in-law's face as she watched me open it. The implication was clear. Here's something you could never buy yourself. I tried to stay composed, focusing on the gifts, and then it happened. My sister-in-law Rebecca handed me the next gift with a smirk on her face. When I unwrapped it, my face went white. It was a huge baby blanket. No, a ginormous baby blanket. But what made it so cruel was that it had been stitched with the words, "Not the baby's fault, but you are." The entire room fell silent. My heart raced, and I felt the blood drain from my face. What kind of sick joke was this? Who does something like that at a baby shower? I looked up, hoping to see Mark stepping in to defend me. But there he was, standing in the corner, his face as pale as mine. He looked horrified, but I could tell he wasn't sure how to react. His mom was already shaking her head, looking at me with a knowing, judgmental glance. That was it. I had had enough. I wanted to walk out. I wanted to scream, but instead I took a deep breath, looking directly at my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, then at Mark. I whispered, barely holding back my tears, "I'm done." Mark rushed over to my side, his face filled with remorse. He took my hand and helped me stand up. "Let's go, babe. We're leaving," he said, his voice firm. But before we could make our way to the door, something unexpected happened. Mark turned back to his family. His mother, her expression smug, said, "What? Are you going to punish us now too? How dramatic." And that's when I saw the fire in Mark's eyes. He looked at his mother and sister one last time, and I saw a shift in him, a change. This was no longer the man I married. This was a man who had been pushed too far. He was ready to fight for me, for us. "Actually," he began, his voice steady, "you've humiliated my wife for the last time." I looked at him, surprised, as he continued, "I think it's time I return the favor." The room fell silent as Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Mom, you've been harassing my wife for years, making her feel like she doesn't belong. And Rebecca, you've been nothing but cruel to her, mocking her whenever you get the chance." He paused, glancing at me. "Well, here's the thing. I've had enough. You want a taste of humiliation? You're about to get it." Before anyone could react, Mark opened his phone and pressed a button. "You see, I've been recording every single conversation you've had about her behind her back. The things you've said about her, the insults, the judgments. You'll be hearing them soon, loud and clear, and not just from me." He turned to me, and I could see his anger, his pain, but also his love for me. do it. I blinked at him in disbelief. Mark had always been a quiet man, not one to create scenes, but right now, he was a man I didn't recognize, and I realized with growing awe that he was doing this for me. His love for me had been so fierce, so unyielding that he wasn't going to let anyone tear me down anymore. I took his phone and pressed play. The room exploded in shocked gasps as the recordings of his family's cruel comments filled the air. I heard his mother's voice mocking me, telling Rebecca that I wasn't good enough for Mark. Then I heard Rebecca snickering about how I would never fit in and how I wasn't worth their time. There was no denying it now. The proof was there for everyone to hear. My mother-in-law's face turned bright red, and Rebecca's smug smile vanished as she realized what had just happened. Mark stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, not saying another word, just letting the silence of the room echo around us. "You really thought you could get away with this?" Mark's voice was low, but there was a sense of finality in it. "You've hurt my wife, and now you'll have to live with the consequences of your actions." I saw my mother-in-law trying to apologize, but her words were hollow. The damage had already been done, and there was no going back from here. Mark turned to me with a soft smile. "Let's go, babe. I think we've made our point." As we left, hand in hand, the silence in the room was deafening. I looked up at Mark, my heart swelling with gratitude. The man I married, the quiet, calm man who always kept the peace, had just given his family a lesson they'd never forget. And in doing so, he had shown me the greatest gift of all. He was willing to fight for me, no matter what. I couldn't have been prouder of the man beside me, and I knew, in that moment, that no matter what came next, we would face it together. We didn't say much on the drive home, but the tension was thick between us. Mark's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his eyes focused ahead, and I could tell he was replaying the events in his head. I knew what he was thinking. He had just burned every bridge with his family. No turning back now. "Mark," I began, but he quickly interrupted me. Don't. I know what you're going to say." His voice was steady but filled with a tiredness I hadn't heard before. "You don't have to thank me. I did it because I love you, because I've had enough of how they've treated you. They crossed a line today, and honestly, I've been sitting on this for far too long." I was silent for a moment, just absorbing what had happened. His family had always been difficult, but this was next level. No one deserved to be treated the way I had been, and to think I had tried so hard to fit in and make them accept me. I had bent over backward to be the wife Mark's family wanted me to be, but nothing was ever good enough. "I didn't want you to be caught in the middle," I finally said, my voice small. "I just wanted a peaceful baby shower, a moment for us to celebrate this new chapter in our lives. Instead, it felt like a nightmare." Mark cut me off gently. "I don't want you feeling guilty. It's not your fault. I should have stood up to them a long time ago. I should have defended you when they first started making you feel like you didn't belong. It was always easier for me to just ignore it, but I see now how wrong that was." I swallowed, trying to push down the emotions bubbling in my chest. I didn't know if I wanted to cry or scream or laugh. This whole day had been a whirlwind, but Mark's words, his apology, and the way he'd stood up for me, finally, left me speechless. I had been waiting for this moment since I'd first met his family, waiting for him to finally take my side in all of this. And now, he had. "We don't have to talk about them," I said softly, "but I don't want you to feel like you've lost everything. You're not alone in this. I'll be here with you no matter what. We'll make it work, just the two of us." Mark glanced at me for a brief moment, his lips tight. Then he nodded. I'm not worried about them. I'm worried about you and about us. The words hung in the air, unspoken but heavy with meaning. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from Mark, the man who always had everything under control. I wanted to reach out and take his hand, to tell him that we'd be okay, that the anger from today wouldn't define us. When we pulled into the driveway, the house felt emptier than it ever had before. As we walked inside, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes puffy from holding back tears earlier. But the look on my face wasn't one of defeat, it was defiance. I had been humiliated, yes, but I wasn't broken. I'll make dinner, I said quietly, trying to break the silence. Mark nodded, but I could see he was still processing everything. We moved through the motions of the evening, making small talk and trying to avoid the real emotions lurking just beneath the surface. I knew Mark was still wrestling with his decision to go as far as he did, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. He had finally shown his true loyalty to me, and in doing so, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. As we sat down to eat, I noticed Mark watching me closely, his gaze soft, yet filled with concern. I smiled at him, grateful for his presence. Mark, I mean it. Thank you for standing up for me. He hesitated before answering, his voice thick with emotion. I should have done it sooner. No, I said firmly. You did it when it mattered. You did it for us. The rest of the evening passed in a quiet sort of peace, the kind that only comes after a storm has passed. We weren't sure what would happen next, but we knew we'd face it together. And for once, I felt like I didn't need to keep pretending that everything was fine. Today had been brutal, but it had also shown me that Mark was more than just my husband. He was my protector, my partner, and now I had no doubt that he would fight for me, no matter the cost. We spent the night talking about the future, about our baby and what kind of life we wanted to build. The thought of facing Mark's family again made me uneasy, but I knew that when the time came, we would deal with it together. As we turned in for the night, I lay beside him, my hand resting on my growing belly, and thought about everything that had transpired. The man I married had finally proven that he would always choose me over anyone else. It wasn't a perfect world, but with Mark by my side, I knew we would be okay. We had each other, and that was enough. And if his family wanted a fight, they would get one. But it wouldn't come from me. It would come from him. The days after the baby shower were filled with silence, but it was a silence that marked the beginning of something new. Mark and I had faced a breaking point, but somehow we came out stronger. I could still feel the sting of the insults, the weight of what his family had done, but I was no longer afraid of them. The moment Mark took a stand for me, everything changed. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this battle. Mark and I spent the next few weeks settling into a new rhythm. We were preparing for our baby, and the tension with his family, though still present, had taken a back seat. Mark kept his distance from his relatives, and I tried to focus on what really mattered, us and the life we were about to create. I could see the regret in his eyes whenever the topic of his family came up, but I always reassured him. I didn't need them. I had him, and that was all that mattered. But things weren't as simple as I wished they could be. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Mark came home looking more burdened than usual. I knew something was up. They're trying to reach me, he said, his voice tense. My mom, my sister, they've been calling, sending messages. They want to talk. I felt my stomach churn. It was only a matter of time before they tried to mend the rift. I braced myself for what was about to unfold. Do you want to hear them out? I asked softly. Mark hesitated. I don't know. Part of me wants to just move on, but the other part of me... He trailed off, frustration clear in his voice. I could feel the struggle inside him. Mark was caught between loyalty to me and the deep-rooted sense of obligation to his family. It's up to you, babe, but just remember I'll be by your side no matter what you decide. The next morning, after much contemplation, Mark finally agreed to meet with them. I could see the toll it was taking on him, but I was proud of him for facing this head-on. It was time to close this chapter, to let them know exactly where they stood with him, and with me. I stayed at home nursing my pregnancy fatigue, but my mind was racing. What if they tried to apologize? What if they tried to manipulate him again? Mark returned late that afternoon, his expression unreadable. I held my breath as he sat down beside me. He took my hand and said, "They apologized. Sort of. But it wasn't for the right reasons. They just want things to go back to how they were." I nodded, already knowing how this would end. And? Mark sighed deeply. And I told them firmly that I'm done. They won't get to control me anymore. They won't get to treat you like that ever again. A wave of relief washed over me. It was over. The finality in his voice gave me peace. It wasn't just his family we were pushing away. It was the toxicity, the manipulation, and the disrespect that we were finally done tolerating. Mark had chosen me, and that meant everything. From that moment on, Mark and I moved forward, not looking back. The baby came soon after, a little bundle of joy that symbolized the future we had built together. As we raised our child, we did so with the understanding that we would never let outside forces tear us apart again. We were stronger, more united, and ready to face whatever came next. Mark's family remained silent, their calls and messages becoming fewer with time, and I realized for the first time that their approval no longer mattered. What mattered was the love and respect Mark and I shared. That was all we needed.